Now we'll go live with Congressman Cole and hear a few words about the latest in Washington and in the 4th District. Congressman?
Sarah, thank you very much, and thank all of you that are on the call for taking the time to listen and hopefully pose a question. This has been a very unusual year, obviously, and we're about to go into a very active phase between now and the end of the year. Unusual in the sense that, on the one hand, we have sort of unitary party control in Washington, D.C. That is, the Democrats have the presidency, they have the Senate, and they have the House. And that's the first time that that's happened for them since the first 2 years of President Obama's presidency back in 2009 and 2010. On the other hand, they have the narrowest majority in the Congress since 1884, so literally in living memory. We have a 50-50 Senate on any given day in the House of Representatives if things are a party line type vote, and lots of votes aren't, but some votes, big ones are. If Democrats lose 3 votes, they lose the vote. That is an extraordinarily narrow majority. So, given that, you would, I think, naturally expect that things would be more bipartisan. We'd move incrementally, but Democrats honestly are under a lot of pressure from their own base. It's not very often, again, that you have the presidency, the Senate, and the House, and so they want this majority to do big things. They want it to do what a FDR New Deal majority did, or an LBJ Great Society majority did. But what hinders that is the fact that, again, Democrats don't have the kind of majorities they had, in 1934 or 1965, 66. So it creates a lot of tension in Washington. Right now, the first thing, Congress, I would actually tell you, last year, and this will seem counterintuitive, worked actually pretty well, and it did it during coronavirus, the economic disruptions, and obviously a very bitter and hard-fought election. But in that time frame, Congress passed 5 bipartisan coronavirus relief bills totaling over $4 trillion. To give you an idea, the total annual budget for the United States is about $4.4 trillion, so this was like another complete budget in a crisis. It passed all the spending bills. There's 12 bills that basically fund the government with overwhelming bipartisan majorities, and it lived within the agreed-upon limits on spending, and passed the National Defense Authorization Act, even actually overrode President Trump's veto when he wanted something unrelated there. And so Congress actually was pretty bipartisan. This year, honestly, I think largely because of the pressure Democrats are under, it's really not. The first coronavirus relief bill, $1.9 trillion. We can talk about different parts of it, but it was a lot. Republicans were willing to, they actually offered an $800 billion to trillion dollar type bill. Democrats chose to go further and used an arcane budget technique. Nothing inappropriate about that, by the way, but arcane, called budget reconciliation, and where you get rid of the filibuster in the Senate and you actually can pass something on a majority vote in the United States Senate, which is not normally the case. So they got that done. We now have 3 big items of business between now and the end of the year that we can foresee. And I always say that we can foresee because it's worth noting coronavirus can tick up and be unpredictable. It is ticking up right now. You also can have a disaster overseas or a natural disaster at home, so things can always upset the apple cart. But the big 3 things we know Congress is going to deal with is, first, the so-called bipartisan infrastructure bill that was fashioned in the Senate, passed the Senate this week by a very hefty 69-30 number. We can talk about the specifics, but it's the biggest infrastructure bill in a generation. Some of the so-called pay-fors, I think, are pretty dubious, and the Congressional Budget Office estimates it would put a $250 billion additional deficit on the country. In other words, it's not really paid for, but there's a lot of things in it that are popular: roads, highways, waterways, broadband, which is the first time we've treated that as infrastructure, and I think a wise thing to do. So there's that. It's coming over to the House. Unfortunately, or fortunately, whatever, the Speaker said, I'm not putting that bill on the floor until I know there are the votes in the House and the Senate for the second item we'll be dealing with. It's a $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill. This is a budget bill that would expand government spending, government programs in a variety of areas, a lot of them popular. Things like dental and vision care and Medicare patients, elder care programs, child tax credit, a lot of things like that. But it also would have some pretty daunting increase in taxes. It would raise the corporate tax rate by 33% from 21 to 28%. It would increase estate and inheritance taxes. It's a big deal to family farms and ranches and small businesses in terms of being able to transfer the business or the farm or the ranch generationally from one family to another. I mean, it would really steeply increase estate taxes, and would increase capital gains taxes for wealthier individuals. So there's going to be a lot of contention on the tax front. That's the second thing we'll deal with. The last thing is the normal appropriations process. That is the 12 bills that actually fund the government. And my guess is they're supposed to all be done by September 30th. 9 of the 12 have passed the House of Representatives. None have yet passed the Senate, but we'll probably get to September 30th. We will have what's called a continuing resolution, extend current funding into the next 2 or 3 months, and then try and negotiate a final product. That will have to be a bipartisan negotiation. The appropriations bills cannot be, subject to the reconciliation process. And I'm so sorry to drag you into this detail, but you have to sort of understand it to know what's going on. And that means when you get to the United States Senate, it will take 60 votes. It's a 50-50 Senate. So any deal will have to be bipartisan. Now, Republicans will ask for less domestic spending because Democrats in the House have increased it by 18% in their bills. They'll ask for more defense spending because Democrats basically only had a 1% increase in defense. Most of our defense experts say you need about a 3 to 5% increase, particularly in a dangerous world with the Russians, the Chinese. We all see what's unfolding in the Middle East, which is disturbing. And finally, Democrats made a decision unilaterally to eliminate most of the pro-life protections that are traditional in appropriations bills. Hyde Amendment, which prohibits federal funding of abortions except in rape, incest, and life of the mother cases. That's been in appropriations bills for 45 years. It was actually originally enacted by a Democratic House and Senate in 1976. There are other pro-life protections, the Weldon Amendment that prevents any doctor, nurse, or healthcare professional from being forced to participate in an abortion. It does not say that they can't do it. It just says nobody can make you do it if you have a moral objection to the procedure. And there's a whole range of others. Those were all taken out of the appropriations bills. That's a big point of contention. There's no way you can get to 60 votes in the United States Senate if you leave all those protections out. So, again, there'll have to be a big negotiation. So as you think about the months ahead, the big things are, one, will the infrastructure bill happen? Will it get to the floor of the House? Will Speaker Pelosi hold it up in what I would argue is an effort of legislative blackmail, saying you can't have this that a lot of Democrats and Republicans agree on until you give me something that only Democrats agree on? The second thing is this huge reconciliation bill, which will be a very partisan fight. It's not clear. The Democrats have 50 votes in the Senate. It's not clear they have the votes in the House. In the Senate, Senator Manchin from West Virginia has said he can't go as high on the tax increases as the Democrats want to go. Senator Semina from Kirsten Semina from Arizona has said, I think we need to do something, but I'm not willing to do $3.5 trillion. So, again, it's not clear that the votes can be lined up. You have to have every single Democrat in the United States Senate. And then finally, the normal appropriations process of government, which is pretty critical in a state like ours, where that would fund Tinker, Fort Sill, all our major research projects that rely on federal dollars, the National Weather Center, I can go on and on, the FAA Center in Oklahoma County. We have 5 military bases in this district. So Oklahoma has a big federal presence, and the normal functioning of government and funding of that is actually very, very important to the Oklahoma economy, particularly central Oklahoma. So with that, that's kind of where we are right now. The House will be called back on August the 23rd. We were actually technically on recess, although I've been all over the district. I'm in Sulphur, Davis, Purcell, and Oklahoma National Guard facility today. So we normally would use this period to travel and visit with people and sort of get back in touch with your district. But we will go back. We will vote on the Budget Reconciliation Act. That's not the bill. It's just a vehicle that has to pass. We'll probably vote on the eviction moratorium that the Supreme Court recently overturned, that the Biden administration has reasserted, because it's not clear they have the authority to do what they've done. And the lines will start firming up on who will be where on these three big fights over, again, infrastructure, reconciliation, and appropriation. So with that convoluted and complex explanation of what's happening, more than happy to start taking questions, Sarah.
Sure. Well, we'll go ahead and before we go to our first question, just a reminder that if you would like to ask a question, just press star 3. Again, to ask a question, press star 3. And if you would like to opt in to future calls like this, press 1. Our first question comes from Sharon from Oklahoma City.
Hi, Sharon. This is Tom. How are you?
Hi, I'm fine. A couple of things regarding the so-called infrastructure bill and all of the freebies the Democrats want to hand out. There's not much in there for seniors, and should seniors expect a hefty increase in our Social Security checks due to the rising cost of living?
You're right. There's not anything in this bill that would relate to Social Security. I actually think probably seniors will get, because of inflation, a pretty good. That's a separate item. Congress actually voted the inflation clause back in the 70s, I think. So it's been around for a long time. We've had relatively low inflation in recent years, so there hasn't been much in the way of increases. That's certainly not true this year. The last couple of months, inflation rate has been running well above 5%. So it's calculated on the basis of the Consumer Price Index. So again, I can't tell you for certain. That decision won't be made until later in the year. It's made independently by the Social Security Administration. But I would be surprised if inflation continues at this rate, if there were not a fairly substantial increase, inflation-adjusted increase in Social Security. I expect that to happen.
All right. Well, we'll go on to our next question. Again, if you'd like to ask a question, press star 3. Our next question comes from John from Lawton.
Hey, John, this is Tom. How are you?
I'm not doing too bad.
Good.
My question is, with all the spending bills that keep getting passed left and right, and all the money going out through the government, what's the plan to fight inflation and to stop the dollar from crashing?
Well, that's exactly, I think you raised the most important concern. The Biden administration and the Federal Reserve have argued that inflation is only transitory, that we will have some, and it probably won't go back to where it was, but it will stop at some point, that a lot of this is disruption in the supply chain. I don't think so. I mean, I have to tell you, I look at we've now for 2 months in a row had the highest inflation rates that we've had in this country for over 20 years. And I talked to all kinds of people. For instance, I remember being yesterday or day before, I was at talking to firefighters in Moore, Oklahoma, and they have new stations going by, and they were telling me how much more the new fire engine they got cost than the last one because of the price of steel and everything else in it. And then I go to the supermarket, the grocery store. Everybody I know tells me this is what milk was last year, this is what it is this year. So I don't see how you can pump this amount of money in the economy and not have inflationary pressures build up. It's actually one of the reasons I think the last COVID relief bill where the first 5 had been very bipartisan. The last one was a strictly partisan, $1.9 trillion exercise. And because, again, I just don't think Democrats are concerned. And when I say Democrats, I mean Democrats in Congress are concerned about inflation. The Biden administration is not concerned about inflation. Republicans are. Now, I mean, we'll know in a year, I guess, who was right and who was wrong. But I do worry that, you can't put this much new money in the economy and not expect the prices of things to go up. So I think it's a problem. I think it's a problem that's likely to get worse before it gets better.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our next question. But if you would like to ask a question, just press *3. Our next question comes from Glenn from Frederick.
Hey, Glenn, this is Tom Cole. How are you?
I'm great. How about you, Congressman?
Doing good. Thank you for asking.
I want to know I noticed where the president is saying that he's asking OPEC to produce more oil. How come we can't produce on our own oil?
Well, we absolutely can produce our own. And, it's amazing to me because the last few years we've become not only energy independent, certainly within North America, but really within the United States. We export energy. We export oil and particularly natural gas. One of the first things the Biden administration did, was number one, cancel the Keystone Pipeline or the XL Pipeline, whichever name you prefer, which is environmentally irresponsible. That oil is Canadian oil and still being produced. It's coming to American refineries by truck and train. It's a lot better coming. And they also stopped leasing and exploration on federal lands, new leasing. That's about 20% of the surface of the United States. Doesn't affect us in Oklahoma, frankly. Probably pushes more production, more rigs into places like Oklahoma and Texas that don't have a big federal landmass, but devastating to places like New Mexico, Wyoming, western states that are energy states where a lot of the land's owned by the federal government. Bottom line is I think it's a misguided policy. We don't need OPEC to be energy independent. We used to need them very badly. It's actually one of the great game changers of the last few years. American production, I don't know what it is today, but it moved from 5.8 million barrels a day up to over 12 in a period of about 4 or 5 years. And that's the genius of the American energy industry. And by the way, that has not slowed down, conversion to quote-unquote cleaner energy. Oklahoma gets over 40% of its electricity from wind power now. I don't have any problem. I think it's a good thing. We ought to use all the above, but putting ourselves back where we're dependent on other countries for oil, I think is absolutely crazy. That's one of the things that we can argue or discuss what American policy is in the Middle East, but none of us like to go to war. And the more dependent this country becomes on foreign energy, the worse it is. The other thing is, while OPEC doesn't include Russia, it does include Iran, which is not a friend of the United States, and Russia benefits, from any lessening of production in the United States. They're a big exporter of oil and natural gas. So why do we want to, either become dependent on our enemies or encourage them to be more successful when we know they're going to put a lot of that money to work against us. So, again, I disagree very much with the president on that issue. We ought to be encouraging additional production as needed within the United States, and we should not be. Look, if you care about climate change, it doesn't matter if fossil fuel production happens in Saudi Arabia or America. It has the same impact on the global environment, but it certainly matters when it comes to everything from American energy independence to the appropriate, national security calculations that we have. We're simply stronger when we can produce the things we need ourselves by ourselves and not be dependent on other countries.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and move on to our next question. But again, if you would like to ask a question, just press *3. Again, to ask a question, press *3. Our next question comes from Kim from Foster.
Hey, Kim, how are you?
I'm good. How are you, sir?
Very good, thank you.
What I'm wondering is we're pulling the troops out, but yet the country's getting overran, like we were trying to help them become free. Do you think they're going to send the troops right back?
Well, we're sending some back right now in order to facilitate the evacuation of American nationals and a lot of our embassy staff, other than our central people. So there actually will be an uptick in troops. Look, I want to be very bipartisan about this. President Trump also wanted to basically remove our troops from Afghanistan. I personally think this has been a mistake. We didn't have that much there, 3,500 troops. We held Bagram Air Force Base, which gave us air superiority over all of Afghanistan, and you could immediately be over the target. Right now, we are sending air support to the Afghan army, but it takes hours to get there from other bases in the Middle East, and you don't have a lot of time over target, so to speak. We had not had significant casualties in Afghanistan for a couple of years because our troops, while they were supporting, they were providing intelligence, they were providing, protecting some key facilities for us, they weren't involved in the combat. Most of the fighting has been done by Afghan troops. But you take away American air power and just the flexibility of the American military, this is a real problem. And we ought to, remember who the Taliban is. These are the people that provided Osama bin Laden a base to operate from. These are the people that have worked with Al-Qaeda and ISIS. It's not a good thing for us to have them back in control of an area where terrorist organizations that want to strike the United States can set up, plan, and train with very little interference from us. So, again, I think it's a big mistake, but I will tell you, again, there's a lot of weariness with being in Afghanistan. I get that, but it's not like years ago where we had tens of thousands of troops there. We're talking 3,500 troops, an American air presence, an American intelligence and counter terrorism operations. Losing that capability in that dangerous part of the world, I think we will look back on and regret. I hope we don't regret it with another 9/11. But again, the people who are going to take over Afghanistan, if the Taliban continues to surge as it is right now, are not friends of the United States. And they will host people that are not friends of the United States. And I think we'll look back and say that was a mistake.
Okay. Well, our next question comes from Aaron from Midwest City.
Hey, Aaron, this is Tom Cole. How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing, Congressman?
Good, thank you.
So earlier you were talking about with the infrastructure bills and all of the pork in there about increases in corporate tax rates and capital gains tax rates, estate taxes, all that stuff.
Correct.
I didn't hear anything on small business pass-throughs. Most of the small businesses I know are pass-through entities, either LLCs or S corporations. And small businesses have just been devastated, while big businesses have been making a fortune over the last year and a half. What is the impact of these bills on small businesses in terms of taxes and business environment?
Well, remember, we don't know for sure because the reconciliation bill, where the tax increases I've just you listed, the bill hadn't been written. What we see now is an outline called a budget resolution. You have to pass a budget resolution before you can do a reconciliation bill. So the actual writing of the bill hasn't been started. We do know these things I talked about are going to be in there. We also know the Democratic plan is to allow the tax cuts that existed primarily for individuals that run out in 25, 26. Republicans plan to extend them. Right now, those will simply run out. I will just tell you this, there's enormous expansion in the size and scope of government here. You're going to need tax revenue to do it. I mean, you can do deficit spending, but there is a limit. And I think you'll see a lot of taxes increased. I mean, the ones I've ticked off are just the ones we know about, but until they actually write the bill, which they do in Ways and Means in the House and the Senate Finance Committee, you're not going to know exactly which ones beyond the ones I've mentioned.
Sorry, I was muted there. Our next question comes, or if you would like to ask a question first off, though, please press *3. And our next question comes from Joe Wood from Lawton.
Hey, Joe, this is Tom Cole. How are you?
Mr. Cole, it's an honor to speak with you, sir, and I truly appreciate everything you're doing to represent our state in Washington, D.C.
Thank you. You're very kind.
Sir, as I've listened to your discussion, I've come up with not only the one question I had, but 8 additional questions, and I will simply ask one.
Okay.
We all know, well, first of all, we need to reinstitute civics in the curriculum in high school so young people and future voters can understand how our government functions. That's just an observation.
Couldn't agree more.
As we all know, Lyndon Johnson raided the Social Security Fund to pay for his great society. Now that I am a baby boomer and I'm reaching my retirement age, what is the plan to stop the raiding of Social Security funds and to keep that system solvent? In my opinion now, it's almost like a pyramid scheme.
Mm-hmm. Now, well, lot there to unpack. Let me walk through it because I actually have legislation on this that I wish people would do. What President Johnson did, to your point, was just add Social Security to the budget because back then it was in surplus to hide the deficit that was associated with the Vietnam War. So no money has been taken out of Social Security. Social Security, when it ran surpluses, and it did from 1983 till 2011, 83 is when Reagan, Tip O'Neill, Howard Baker set up a commission and reformed the Social Security, fund and added things like, honestly, they very slightly increased the percentage that you pay into it. They put on an escalator the amount of your income that would be subject to Social Security tax. They told people, like I was 34 at the time, you can't get a full check at 65. It'll be 66 for you. Had a 1-year-old son. It's going to be 67 for him. In other words, they made tweaks around the edges. Their argument was you're going to probably live a lot longer, which I think is probably true. So since 2011, more Social Security money has gone out of the trust fund than come in. We still have a substantial trust fund. It was built up by the baby boomers, by your generation and mine. I'm a baby boomer. And it will continue to fund Social Security through about 2033 at the full levels. On the other hand, if we don't do something to add, more money into it, and the reason why it's having a problem is simply the largest generation in American history is the baby boomer generation. They are retiring, and they're going to live longer than any other generation before them. When Social Security was originally set up, you got your first check at 65. The average American only lived to 63. And if you got to 65, the average person only lived about another 5 years until about 70. Today, if you get to 65, you have a 50% chance of getting to 85, and you have about a 25% chance of getting into 93, 94. I always add, now that I'm 72, I think this is a really good thing. I'm not arguing against it, but you have to change the manner in which Social Security is funded if you're going to sustain it. So, again, I have legislation to deal with this. We would go back and basically do what Reagan, Tip O'Neill, and Howard Baker did, set presidential commission. It could make relatively minor changes. The sooner you do this, the cheaper it will be, and we could extend its life a lot further into the future. But way too little attention is paid to Social Security, Medicare, and Medicaid in Washington, D.C. They're considered, number one, the third rail of American politics. If you try to change them, you'll get killed. But 60% of all federal spending are those three programs. It's not defense, it's not education, it's not transportation. 60% are all these, just those three programs. And if you add then federal pensions and things like that, we have a very significant federal workforce in this state, a lot of military retirees. You're pushing it close to 70%. So the real money's in the entitlement programs. And I'm not arguing you should cut them, but you got to fund them differently, or you're going to run into the problems that you're talking about. And again, it's the downside of a good problem. A lot more people are living a lot longer. I'm kind of for that. So let's do what we need to do to make sure these programs that they depend upon are appropriately funded.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and move on to our next question. But again, if you would like to ask a question, just press *3. And if you would like to opt in to future calls like this one, press 1. Our next question comes from Brad from Lawton.
Hey, Brad, this is Tom. How are you?
Great. How are you? Thank you, sir.
Good. Thank you.
I'm a small business owner in the Lawton area, and ever since COVID has happened, we are having a very, very tough time hiring employees like everybody else across the country, which I think I heard this week there's 10 million open jobs. So
Yep.
At what point is Washington going to cut unemployment extra benefits so we can start seeing the workforce come back? I know Governor Stitt signed a bill to reduce it, the extra funding, and I actually had about 7 people walk in the front door for application in the last 10 days, which is the most I've had in 12 months.
Well, Governor Stitt did the right thing, and if it were up to the Republicans, they all voted against this extension of unemployment in February when the latest COVID relief bill was passed. 20-some-odd Republican governors, one Democratic governor, too, by the way, have tried to end the program early and take some of the money and incentivize people coming back. As I'm sure you'll recall, Governor Stitt said, instead of incentivizing people to stay at home, why don't we give the first 20,000 people to come back in the workforce a $1,200 bonus for coming back to work? I'd rather pay them to work than pay them not to work. And I actually thought that was a very good idea and issued a statement to that effect at the time. And I usually don't comment on state issues because, I'm not in the state legislature and I'm certainly not the governor, and they got to do their job. But on this one, I think Governor Stitt did exactly the right thing. We now have a court case where, state courts ordering him to extend the benefits through September 30th. I don't think they're going to go beyond that even Washington, D.C. I think even the Democrats have figured out this is not working. The American people are pretty smart. If you tell them I'll pay you more money to stay home than you can make going to work, guess what? They'll stay home. They're just responding to economic incentives the way anybody else would. I will tell you this, if the Republicans were in charge, this would be over. We're not. Our governors and the places where we have control the state legislature are trying to do exactly what you suggest. Oklahoma has tried to do that. Hopefully they will ultimately succeed in doing that. But, you know, we do have, this is like the first time in modern history we've had more job openings than we have people on unemployment. Now, I will tell you, sometimes there's a skills mismatch there, but Congress has actually put a lot more money, and Oklahoma has a great career tech system, you know, to try and give people skills where, you know, they can go make a decent living. And so we're happy to help train you, but you need to go back to work. And again, you know, our unemployment rate here, even with all that, is still only, it's less than 5%. So I think it's about 4%. So Oklahomans are willing to work. They're out there. But again, there's always some people, if you can make more money not working, will do it. And so, you know, I hope we can deal with that and, you know, put more workers in the workforce.
All right, we'll go ahead and move on to our next question. And this question comes from Sid, and he has a question about China.
Hi, Sid. This is Tom Cole. How are you?
I'm good, sir. How are you doing today?
Very good, thank you.
I appreciate you taking the time to do these public forums. Michael, I'm a veteran. I'm 67 years old, and I did 7 years in the United States Army, and I'm serious about this question I'm about to ask, and is this. We fought China and Korea. We fought China and Vietnam. They've backed up our enemies in Iraq and Afghanistan. They've sent us to COVID. They've done everything in the world to bring our country down. We know they've got lots and lots of influence in Washington, D.C. They have basically declared war on us. When are we going to stop pussyfooting around and get some people in Washington that recognize that?
Actually, I would tell you President Trump did. And you can, you know, like him, not like him, but he really broke the pattern of American policy. So far, the Biden administration has said they're going to continue a lot of that, but I'm not comfortable that they're following through as aggressively. A different defense budget would make me feel a lot better. But if you recall, President Trump pushed back in the South China Sea. He pushed back on trade in particular, putting a lot of tariffs on Chinese goods in the United States. But you're 100% right. I'm actually reading a book. You'll see it on my website. If you ever come, I always have, what I'm reading. And the next book up is a book by a guy named Michael Pillsbury, called The 100-Year Marathon, Communist China's secret effort to replace the United States, or replace America as the global superpower. I'd really recommend everybody read it. Pillsbury is like one of the premier guys all the way back to the 1960s. And the first thing he'll tell you in the book is he got it wrong. He said, we all thought China would evolve into a peaceful, democratic, sort of capitalist society. That's not what's happening. And they are, exactly as you suggest in your remarks, our number one adversary in the world, and they don't make any bones about planning to replace us as the most important country in the world. So, it's one of the reasons, honestly, in D.C. that there'll be a big fight. I think some of my friends on the other side of the aisle are slow to realize that. And, I don't know if you saw recently, the Chinese are building 120-odd new missile silos in western China, roughly doubling their ICBM force. Now, they're not comparable to us as a nuclear power, but they clearly are increasing very rapidly. They actually have a Navy that has more ships than the United States, and our Navy isn't all concentrated in the Western Pacific. Theirs is. Ours is spread around the world because, again, we have obligations on every part of the world. So this struggle between these two great economies, China's the largest population in the world. We're number 3, but they outnumber us 4-1. They're the second largest economy, but besides ours, and they're probably the most rapidly growing economy. I suspect future presidents and certainly Congresses are going to be hard on China. We had agreed a couple of years ago to set up a China task force that was bipartisan. Speaker Pelosi decided not to do that. There is a China task force recommending all sorts of, that Republicans have set up, recommending all sorts of things, tax incentives to bring back pharmaceutical manufacturing from China to the United States, an effort to make sure that we rely on China for what are called rare minerals. These are things you have to produce high-end chips and weapon systems, what have you. We have more than enough of that in the United States to take care of ourselves, but we've made things very difficult in the regulatory sense. So we only have one or two mines operating to provide about 15% of the global needs, and what we need. But we need to be more aggressive in dealing with this. So you got your finger on the problem, and I would tell you, I think a lot of Washington is waking up to this. I give President Trump the credit for being the first leader at the presidential level to talk about China, accurately and point to everything from the Wuhan lab to their violation of trade agreements to their assertion of military power in the Western Pacific. And I mean, look at what's happened in Hong Kong, where they broke every agreement they had. Look at what's happened to the Uyghurs in Western China, where they basically are involved in, a gulag type situation of that population. These are very serious enemies of ours, and you're exactly right. They're going to be our main rival, probably as far as the eye can see.
All right. Well, we'll go ahead and move on to our next question. But before that, just wanted to remind you that if you'd like to ask a question, please press *3. Again, to ask a question, just press *3. Our next question comes from Lori from Tuttle.
Hey, Lori, this is Tom Cole. How are you?
Hey, I am blessed and highly favored. How are you, Tom?
Very good. Thank you.
Good deal. Hey, I have a question. So with the borders opening up and the immigrants coming in or other people coming into our country, who is going to support them as far as any kind of health care or housing, because we are in a housing shortage? And is that going to be left up to the citizens? Because to me, that's really not fair for them to raise our taxes to help pay for somebody else who doesn't pay anything in.
I couldn't agree more. It'll be the American taxpayer. That's who's picking up the cost for all of this. And, we've had an explosion of illegal immigration. That's been a consistent problem, but honestly, Trump had done a lot of things. The stay in Mexico policy, if you came in and tried to claim asylum, and about 80% of the people that claim asylum aren't eligible for asylum. It just takes a while to work through the court cases. You'd have to wait there until American courts could adjudicate it. That helped a lot tougher. Obviously he's building the wall. That really does make a difference. It's not the only thing, but it helps channel illegal migration toward places where you can then concentrate border patrol. The cost is going to be on the American people. And, the Biden administration said this is just normal, it's seasonal, it'll change. It's not normal. And these are the highest number of illegal crossings in over 20 years. It usually gets better around this time of year because it's so hot that a lot of people don't risk coming in illegally. It's getting worse instead. I mean, they just basically turned on the green light and said, come on over. And, bad enough in terms of the illegal traffic, the amount of fentanyl that we've seized in the border is like tripled, and we obviously don't get it all, so there's more drugs coming into the United States. The amount of human trafficking, which is tragic. These are usually young people, usually young women, that are going to be sexually exploited both along the way and sadly in our own country, is spiking up. And, this population that's moving up, these are not countries that, are nearly as vaccinated as the United States, so you bring a lot of COVID in. And without adequate testing of those people, they're being sent in other parts of the country. So it is a full-blown administration-created disaster. And there's no question. I mean, you ask the American people. The polling on this is very clear, but it's just dangerous. So, you know, you can like Donald Trump or not like him, but when he was doing things that were working, you shouldn't just change them because you don't like him. Again, you know, his border policies were far superior in terms of cutting into the flow of illegal immigration, cutting down the flow of drugs, cutting down on sex trafficking than anybody before him, and certainly much better than President Biden. So, you know, this is probably going to get worse before it gets better because I don't see any change in the administration. They don't admit we messed up. They just talk about how terrible Donald Trump was. Well, on this issue, honestly, again, I don't think he was terrible. I think he saw the problem and tried to do things about it. They were working. I think President Biden has undone those things, and we're going to pay the price.
Okay, well, we'll go ahead and move on to our next question. But again, if you would like to ask a question, just press *3. And if you would like to opt in to future calls like this, press 1. Our next question comes from Maxine, and she had a question about spending.
Hey, Maxine, how are you?
Hi, Mr. Poe. I'm fine. Yes, I have a question about spending. It's just so out of control. It's I think we've already spent like 4-point-something trillion already just for COVID, and then the senators passed 1.2 trillion for infrastructure that was kind of infrastructure, 20% infrastructure, and 80% whatever. And then they've got another $3.5 trillion that's human infrastructure. And then they've got, I think you said 9 other things that's coming down the pike. And isn't there going to be a budget bill that's going to have to be done? And they're wanting the ceiling lifted on it to get like probably $6 trillion on it. We can't just keep printing money and printing money and printing money. The thing came out today that inflation is already 7.8. This is Jimmy Carter 2.0 on steroids. I remember the 70s, you know, and you can't just keep printing money. I mean, somebody's got to pay the price.
Couldn't agree more. I remember the 70s, too. I remember racing to our realtor and more so I could lock down my first house purchase at 9% interest rates. 9%. And it got up to 14 for houses and higher than that for short-term loans. So I share your concern here. Again, there weren't any Republican votes for the $1.9 trillion COVID relief bill. The infrastructure bill is partially paid for, but I tell you, not completely, and both our senators voted against it. Jim Inhofe is renowned as one of the most pro-infrastructure guys, and yet he thought this was just inappropriate. That is very telling to me. No Republicans will vote for the $3.5 trillion reconciliation bill that Democrats are going to run. None in the Senate will, none in the House will. The margins are very narrow. We actually might beat that bill if, again, the Joe Manchins, the Kirsten Sinemas, some of these other people come along. But the pressure on them is going to be to go along with their president and their majority, and I get that. Yeah, I mean, the big battles from now to the end of the year are the spending battles. The appropriations process, which is funding the government, again, you know, Republicans will try and bring down the domestic spending. They will be in favor of more defense spending. I think that's appropriate, but that will be a negotiated process, and we'll see where we end up. But it's clearly been way too much spending. Again, a lot of things. I would argue Democrats have used COVID, where we did have a genuine national emergency, 600,000 people dead. You know, it's a real problem, but it doesn't justify everything that is in the COVID relief packages, and particularly this last one. So all I can tell you is I think you're right to be concerned about it. I think it is inflationary, and I think the battles between now and the end of the year are going to be very defining, and we'll see who cares about inflation and who doesn't.
Okay. Well, I think we have.
Let me just add this real quickly. I think you'll find the Oklahoma delegation is going to be voting pretty much the way you would want them to. Sorry.
You're good. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. I think we have time for just one last question. Again, if you would like to opt into future calls like this, though, just press 1. Our next question comes from Kimberly from Wynnewood.
Hi, Kimberly. How are you?
I'm fine. How are you, Mr. Cole?
Good. Thank you.
So I would like to talk a little bit about health care. I am a registered nurse, so health care is my passion. But I really wanted to put my focus on the veterans, and my husband is a veteran, so I'm very passionate about that also. Initially, the VA was really having a lot of issues, getting care to the veterans, so we instituted, or they were pretty much forced to institute, the community care program. Mm-hmm. So as you know, the community care program initially was staffed with an entity called TriWest. So then that contract was relooked at, and now we're sitting in an entity called Optum. So that transition was atrocious. You still can't hardly get a referral. You can't get a person to call you back without making several phone calls. I advocate for my husband very hardly for the care that he needs. I really, truly do not know how veterans navigate that mess when they do not know how to do that. They have no medical background. I can tell you that I literally have the chief nursing officer for community care on speed dial. That's how many times I have had to march up the chain to get what my husband needs. So, as a veteran, that's a concern for me for other veterans, or how are they navigating this system? I think it went from, sitting in TriWest ballpark to Optum to now being a bigger mess than what it was to begin with. So I wanted to ask really what is being looked at to really help the community care program, help the veterans, help get all of those issues resolved, because there's a lot of miscommunication between the VA and through community care. Things do not run smoothly, and it really needs to be looked at seriously.
Well, number one, thank you for your husband's service, and thank you for your advocacy on his behalf, because these are benefits obviously he earned and deserves, and the American people want him to have. My dad was a career military guy, and I will tell you, spent the last 12 years of his life in veterans facilities because he had Alzheimer's and didn't know any of us the last 11, and he got great care. He was in Ardmore and Norman, and we're always eternally grateful for the dedicated professionals there. United States is pretty remarkable when it comes to care for veterans. We don't spend more money than any other country in the world on veterans. We spend more money than every other country in the world combined on veterans. This is a big, and that's because it's important to the American people. We do this because I think Americans genuinely appreciate people like your husband that put themselves in harm's way or ran the risk for the rest of us, and they want to make sure this is done. So the veterans budget, health care actually doubled under Bush. It doubled again under Obama, and it will continue to increase. There's very few people in Washington that are opposed on either side of the aisle to spending the money it takes. There is enormous frustration about what you're talking about in terms of the administration. And the VA has been, anything but user-friendly in some cases. I think, we're trying to get that better. Actually, we had a 91% approval rating for the VA amongst veterans when Donald Trump was president. I don't know that things have changed at all. I would hope and assume that's the same way. But this is something Congress does work on. It's not And it works on it in a bipartisan fashion. It doesn't matter if it's Democrats or Republicans. Nobody argues for reducing veterans' benefits or not making them more flexible and available. So, I can't tell you I have an immediate answer to the specific questions you concerned. I don't sit on the VA committee. Actually, we don't have any Oklahomans on that particular committee. But I will tell you that it tends to be a very bipartisan committee. It has expanded rather than contracted benefits, and it shares your frustration. I talked to a lot of members on there about, I'll give you an example. Several years ago, there was a VA hospital being built in Denver. It was supposed to cost $368 million. It cost $1.4 billion. And people just took away the authority of the VA to contract and gave it to the Army Corps of Engineers to actually run these projects because they're much better at giving you a realistic estimate. It's easier to fire somebody in the VA than any other part of the federal government. That's because Congress, got pretty upset that there were people. Most people, again, the system worked really hard for the veterans. I've seen it. I mean, my family's experience. I mentioned my dad, my brother, actually is a Vietnam era, not from Vietnam, but a Vietnam era, disabled veteran from an accident. So most of those folks are good, but if they're not providing care, we don't want to wait around. We want to fire them right now. And so we've actually done more of that. You have fewer civil service protections, if you will, in the VA than you do in any other part of government. So all I can tell you is we'll keep working it. This district, as you would know, is a big veterans district. We not only have, of course, active facilities like Tinker and Fort Sill that attract a lot of population. Oklahomans serve at a higher rate than most people in most other states. And again, that creates a big and robust veterans community, and we work hard on those issues on a regular basis. We'll continue to do it because we know we all owe the men and women that took up that challenge, and we committed to do certain things for them, and at least as long as I'm a member, I'm going to do everything I can to make sure we keep those promises.
Thank you, Congressman. Well, we are near the end of our telephone town hall, and sorry we couldn't get to everyone's questions, but you'll have the opportunity to leave a message and receive a call back from our office after the Congressman provides some final words. Congressman?
Sarah, thank you very much. Thank all of you that took the time to visit with me and to listen, and thank all of you that posed questions. We're sorry we can't get to everybody in this format, but we appreciate those of you that, again, ask questions. I will tell you, number one, we're very serious about trying to make sure if you've got individual concerns, if it's a veterans issue, if it's a Social Security issue, if it's a passport case, whatever it is, we have a pretty robust operation to try and help people interface more effectively with the federal government. Please don't hesitate to call our offices in Ada and Lawton and Norman and obviously Washington, D.C. as well. And we're very interested in what you have to say. I spend a lot of time traveling around the district. As I mentioned earlier today, I was in Davis, I was in Sulphur, I was in Purcell, I was at a Oklahoma National Guard helicopter base that we have just outside of Purcell and south of Lexington. We're very interested in what the issues are and what Oklahomans think, and we want to try and reflect those views and those values in Congress. I do think this is going to be a very consequential 4 or 5 months coming up, where we deal with the appropriations process, we deal with the infrastructure bill, we deal with this gigantic reconciliation bill, and there'll undoubtedly be other things that none of us know that pop up. But your input is always welcome and valued. We appreciate it very much. It's helpful to us when you call and express opinions. I get regular reports on, okay, this is the number of people that called in the office. These are the concerns they had. This is where they are in the issues. Or these are people that are emailing us or writing us. So we're always happy for the input. We'll always try and work hard to represent you in a way that's appropriate and consistent with your values. Last point I would just say is please stay engaged. I always say I get to represent almost 800,000 people in the United States Congress. There's always somebody that knows more about any issue I'm voting on that lives in my district than I do. And so hearing from them or finding out who they are, consulting with them is extremely important. So we appreciate the input, we value it, and we certainly try to act on it. So with that, good luck in this very difficult time. We still have COVID spiking a little bit, tough economy that we're coming out of, but I have a lot of confidence in the people of Oklahoma, the state of Oklahoma, and certainly the United States of America. So we'll get through this stuff. We'll do well, and just stay involved and stay engaged.